Okay, we are live. So I'll give a brief introduction. And did we lose someone? I think someone just
Georgie,
disappeared.
which
Judy.
Okay, he doesn't need to hear this part. I'll just start. So this is a promotion video for the VIP project, Artificial Intelligence for Decision Making. And I recorded a short video last year. So these characters have watched that video, if they watched anything, or they talked to me at the time before they chose to do the VIP. This year, I thought I'll give you a short introduction and then ask them to share their experiences, so students choosing the VIP know better what they are getting into. So we didn't plan this very well. We don't really have a very detailed plan. We will just go around and have a conversation, right? If you are interested in the VIP, listening to this conversation might help. Okay, so my short summary is this. We have a fairly strong research group in St. Andrews on constraint programming, which is a kind of AI system that is more similar to logic and making optimal decisions under some constraints. It is applied to a lot of problems, so it is very hard to give examples without giving a lot of examples. But it is as simple as things like Sudoku. So if you have a Sudoku that you want to solve, this is the classic example we always give. You say, I have 81 variables and I want to find the solution such that the first row is distinct, the first column is distinct, etc. So the tools we have developed are to do with the modeling and solving of problems of that sort. So there's a tool called Conjure, which is the main starting point. There's another one called Solver, which is a backend or middleware, I guess. And then there are a bunch of solvers, which I think we support 12 solvers these days through this. One problem we are having with this system is that the solvers are independent pieces of software. Then we have Solver, which is written in Java, which targets all of them. And then we have Conjure, which is written in Haskell. So there's 3 separate code bases, and they are interacting in weird ways. So part of the VIP is about re-implementing that code base in Rust. So there are several reasons for why we decided to do this, but I'll just leave it there. I'll just say half of the group roughly focused on rewriting software in Rust, testing it, using continuous integration, documentation, and trying to do that properly, right? So using all the modern software engineering tools we have pull requests, we review each other's code. So the idea is we sort of work like a small startup almost, and we write code, we meet weekly, and everyone has small projects in this area. And the second part is about using the existing system for other applications. So it isn't just writing Rust. There are another half of the students, and everyone will share their experiences in a minute. They do things like visualization for our problems, some of the problems we are solving, improving the documentation, writing web-based demonstrator applications, which has been really, really useful, and also a block programming interface, which came out of Nadine's work last semester. So there are a lot of opportunities for doing other things, not writing Rust code to improve the system, but also doing other things in the same sort of ecosystem. I think Felix said it's about the Conjure ecosystem, right? Another one I forgot to mention is a performance dashboard. Like you run a bunch of things and you want to show them on a performance dashboard. So another group of students worked on that. Yes, this is the kind of things we did last year in 2 semesters. We want to continue working on similar stuff next year. We have a small list of potential projects, so you're not going to be starting from nothing, but we are not very prescriptive about it. You'll be able to, as you learn, you'll be able to choose what project you are passionate about and work on that. Okay, I don't want to talk too much, but I already did, so I'll stop there, and I will say let's start with Georgie, because he has the most connection problems.
I have Linux problems, but it seems to work out.
Okay, so what have you done? What did you love? What did you maybe not like?
So, over the course of this IB in the first semester, I was actually focusing more on the kind of like not on the Rust part of the project, but on kind of like the support part of it. And specifically, I developed a web tool that looks through a massive directory of Essence files. Essence is the input language that Conjure uses, and helps us find files that use specific features of the Essence language, which we could use to test our software and to find things that aren't documented. So in the second semester, I've started working on the Rust side of the project. I've mostly worked on the AST, so the representation of the Essence language, of the problem in the Essence language in Rust, and also on the rewrite engine, which takes our initial Essence problem and slowly rewrites it into a representation that the solver would understand by applying rules. Specifically, me and Nick developed Uniplate, which comes from Pascal, and it's a way to generically traverse a tree, which is really useful for our rewrite engine. So yeah, I think overall this project was a great experience for me because for the first time, I've actually worked in like a big software project as part of a large team, and we're using something similar to the Agile methodology. I don't know if it's actually Agile or not, but it was definitely a good experience. Yeah. Sorry, was this bad?
Anything? No, I think that's good. That's very good. So I'm suggesting you can choose the next speaker, and everyone does a similar thing to what you've done, and then we could do more sort of general conversation as well after that.
Okay, Nadine?
Yeah, so what I worked on in the first semester was basically just filling out the documentation, because Conjure uses a very specific input language called Essence, and then in the next semester I made a web blog editor for that language and linked it in with Conjure and added several other features. Yeah, I've really enjoyed working on this VIP. It's one of the best things about it is you can pick something that you enjoy, and you kind of just find your niche of what you want to do and what you find interesting. And it just really gives you motivation to keep on working with it. So that's what makes, well, VIPs in general different from normal modules, is that it mostly comes from you and what you want to do and what you want to put into it. I don't know what else to say, so...
I think we will share the link to your block programming interface and at the bottom of this video. If we were a YouTuber, we would say check the description. So yeah, people can have a look at that. And I'll just insert one additional bit of information. Everything we've done is open source, of course. So I'll put a link to the GitHub organization, which includes all of the code we've all written throughout the 2 semesters. Okay, if you don't want to say any more, you could maybe pop the speaker.
Felix?
Hello, I'm Felix. I worked on the last 2... So, I've been on this project for 2 semesters now, and both of the semesters I've been working on Conjure Oxide, which is the Rust rewrite of the whole kind of Conjure plus Savile Row tech stack. And it was definitely a really software engineering, like, holistic approach, and we got a lot of really great, like, real-world software engineering experience because there was a lot of team collaboration. Each of us was working on our own kind of new features, but it was in the context of this greater project, and they were all working with each other and affecting each other, and so we had a lot of collaboration, we had a lot of code review, some pair programming, and I definitely feel like I learned a lot from those 2 semesters. I improved a lot in the second semester, I think, in terms of my output, in terms of my approach to the work, which I think there's a lot to learn because Oz has a very useful approach to software engineering, which is just get something working and then refine later, because I had a bit of an issue with trying for perfection very soon, right off the bat. And this kind of helped me get that under control and have a more healthy outlook. So Rust itself, I think, was also really fun. I've discovered my love for a new language. I think it does a lot of things really nicely, and I'm going to be using it for future projects, personal projects, school projects, work as well, if I can get my hands on any. Yeah.
I like how it's turning into praise the project, praise Oz. Just to see you praising.
Do more of that.
I think it is hard to say the downsides now, but maybe once we go through everyone, we could talk about like what was the most challenging as well, because I think that's useful too. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Should I say some downsides?
Yeah, go on if you have them. Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, so all of that was a lie. No. So definitely, I think the structure of the project makes it so that you need to do a lot more work in terms of time management. It's very easy to fall into the trap of doing this kind of just as a side project, but it very much still is obviously a full course that you're working on, just minus the deadline, I guess. So a lot of the reliance falls on you to make your own deadlines, to make your own schedules, and that can be a bit daunting. I think definitely in the first semester I had a bit of an issue with that, but taking very small steps to do the software engineering, specifically, I guess, for Rust, but this is definitely also applicable, I think, to the different projects you could be doing. Taking very small steps, keeping basically all of your code, as much as your code on the repository for people to look at, and kind of to motivate you to not leave it there for 2 weeks without any which I had some issues with. I think that's a good way to encompass that. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think that's a very good point. Like, I don't want to micromanage your time, and I really want you to manage your own time. And that is a skill you have to develop. I think most of the time you have to develop it through the VIP, because before, your time is managed by this week we are working on this, and next week this is your coursework. So you know exactly what to do. But here, yeah, absolutely, you have to manage your time, and that can be very challenging. And also, like, you want to share as soon as you reach a blocking point, and that is true for software engineering jobs you might get in the future as well. Like, I think this is one of the discussions we had with you, Felix, was about, like, don't try to make it work then show it to people. You want to, like, do a cycle of work, like a unit of work on it, like one afternoon, and then you go, this is what I've achieved, this is where I got to, this is the blocking point. And that is very good, because people can give you feedback, someone else can take it over. Like, but if you wait it until it is perfect, that could be, you don't know it, right? This is a researchy project as well. So in some cases, that work could take 2 years to finish. You're never finishing it. You just need to do, make progress and document what you've done. Yeah. Okay.
I guess Kieran.
Okay. So I'm Kieran. I've also similarly been working on the Rust stuff, kind of writing the rewriter that kind of takes in the essence and transforms it into something that one of the models can actually like understand and solve. Yeah, I think kind of like Felix was saying, the biggest like upside to this module is kind of like doing a big group project. Like, kind of, it's one of the only things that you can do in the university to get like software engineering experience, like true software engineering experience. The practicals kind of hide away a lot of the like difficulties of like managing your time, managing blockers, relying on other people. Like, your projects are kind of all solo for the most part, whereas this, you kind of have to rely on other people having things done, and like working through things together. So I think that's a big plus. It gives you a lot of good experience. It's very easy to talk about in interviews, etc., things like that, and it actually like, makes you a better programmer. I think, like, much better than a normal like module would. The other good thing, I think, is that if you are interested in Rust and things like that, this is kind of the only way in the university to kind of get into it. And it is a really interesting like language. It's really different from like most other kind of programming languages you'd be used to and stuff. And I think if anyone has like an interest in that, it's like, I would say go for it, because it's a pretty good way to learn it and then like use it in the future. I guess I'll do a downside a bit as well, but yeah, the independence is kind of like a double-edged sword. Like Felix is saying, you kind of need to take like your time and manage it properly. But I think it's more than that. It's more than just like your deadline's right at the end, so you have to like make sure you work it. It's that your deadline kind of isn't, oh, my thing's all done like by the deadline. There's kind of a lot of stuff that happens on the way there, and it's not really like the project's complete when the deadlines are over. A lot of it is going to be work left kind of unfinished, and it can feel a bit weird that you're kind of leaving things unfinished. It feels like you've failed in some way, that you've not got it all complete, but that's kind of something else you have to deal with, is that like when you're doing like a big open source project like this, like it's going to go on forever basically, like until people stop caring. So it's going to go on for like years and years probably. So you're kind of just doing what you can in a year. But yeah, it's still, I would say it's really fun and definitely like one of the best kind of experiences you can get.
Yeah, I think you need to be prepared to finish, like stop at a place that is sensible and documented for someone else to take it over from there.
Yeah.
Because it will outlive your involvement,
Yeah.
most likely.
Really quick, related to that, I thought I'd mention that also this creates a lot of projects that can be taken further than itself, than the VIP. For example, the Uniplate library, which is in Haskell, which is a really great way of navigating syntax trees, which is exactly what we're doing with Conjure Oxide, doesn't exist in Rust. And one of our members, who isn't here right now, but he essentially is taking that into further and making a full Rust library, which supports that, which can be just used by anyone. And I think that's a really great effect of working on the VIP, is that you find things which you can do and contribute to the greater kind of community.
Okay, well, I guess I'll hand it off to someone else. I'll choose a non-Rust person this time. Oh, there's only non-Rust people, actually. I'll say Pedro, you should go.
Yeah, awesome. So my name is Pedro. I'm second year comp sci and maths. I actually joined in second semester, so halfway through the year. And that did have its downfalls in terms of I wanted to get more into the Rust component of it just from the get-go, and it does have a bit of a learning curve, so I'll mention that. So learning a lot about constraint programming, solvers, everything, and all that jazz, it took me quite a few weeks to get used to, and along the way I had a lot of support, from Felix and Georgie, Nick, who's unfortunately not here, but I got to annoy them a lot on a weekly basis in terms of understanding and debugging code, and also learning Rust, which is quite a lot of fun. So I wrote a bunch of helper functions at first for Rust. I then moved on to GitHub Actions, so improving code coverage deployments. And then my final kind of big bulk of a project was creating a way to generate static dashboards to compare Conjure native versus Conjure Oxide, so Minion Oxide. And overall, I thoroughly enjoyed the process. As many of the people already mentioned, the whole time and time management is a bit of a double-sided sword. So you kind of like have your own independence to work on your own time, but at the end of the day, you do have to keep yourself accountable somehow. I did the big mistake of, creating a massive PR like the week before it was due. Don't do that, by the way. Not a good idea. It's really good to kind of like start slowly pushing in code, which is what I did at the beginning, and then I kind of like completely had like a whole thing, and then kind of like submit it and let people kind of give you gradual feedback. So don't do what I did. But overall, I really enjoyed it. The other thing that I will mention is, especially for second years going into third year, it provides you a lot of the really useful skills in software engineering for the big software engineering 15 and 15 credit, so entire year-round software engineering project. So that's really, really important, especially even if it comes down to like good version control, doing PRs, issues, and kind of like keeping the whole flow going. That's really, really useful. And yeah, I mean, other than that, really enjoy the process. So.
I think someone should choose Stella to talk
Yes,
as well.
awesome Stella.
So my aspect of the project was far less into Rust. I was kind of scared of the whole thing. I did much more what I appealed to me visually was the colors and the visualizations and how we could represent the solutions that we obtained from some of them demonstrations that already existed. So I spent the first half, so semester one, going through the demos that already existed, notebooks, and even just little snippets of code which actually were supposed to demonstrate how Conjure would work, and maybe the examples were outdated and didn't work with more recent versions. So essentially built a tiny library of little notebooks that all demonstrated some of the problems in constraint programming and then had visualizations for the solutions, whether that was mathematically like Langford's numbers or the magic hexagon problem. And I used that first semester to really build up my skills and competence in Python and understanding of how Conjure works and its applications. It's only in second semester that I really got the confidence to actually tackle something slightly more large and longer term. So that's when I looked at the demonstration, the demo that already exists for the permutations and patterns webpage, which was a webpage that worked, but wasn't particularly interesting. And it had this key issue that permutations as a mathematical feature are just sequences of numbers, which by themselves are kind of unintuitive and difficult to understand. So it would have been really cool if we could have represented those lists of numbers as grids. And so that's what I tackled. Again, using Python at the start and then moving into JavaScript, CSS, HTML, all of that web development side, which I had never done before. So that was picking up from nothing and just learning really on the job. And that was a huge challenge. And at the same time, it meant that I was learning things that were very, very specific to the task I was doing. I used a library which apparently no one uses at this level, which was D3. But it just worked in this case. And I like that freedom. The fact that I could just figure out what I was doing as I was going along, not out of what the curriculum was telling me, but out of what I needed to solve the problem that I was facing. So I really like that aspect of independence. And also the fact that as a mathematician, I could tackle the side of the VIP, which was more interesting to me, which is where my interest was piqued by just the math behind permutations. And so I think that was nice. It's also, there's lots of people focusing on the group work of Rust and stuff, but there's also space for other people to tackle other sides of what the entire Conjure ecosystem is about. Just...
Cool. Yeah, I think you mentioned a few very interesting things, like collectively. One of them is like steep learning curve, and I think it is steeper than a lot of other modules. And it is also harder because you don't go through a curriculum. Oh, did I get one of those? AI for you. That's not the kind of AI we do, don't worry. But it is also project driven, so you learn what you need to solve that problem, which has upsides and downsides. So upsides, I think it's very motivating because you want to get something done and you are learning the required tools to make that work. I guess the downside is you could still leave gaps, like you could learn something, but if you don't go through a curriculum someone designed for you, maybe you will still have some gaps. You've only learned as much as you needed to get this work done. So that's a challenge, I think. It isn't all positive, but I think the motivation of like getting something done and learning something for a project to work is quite good. And just one more thing I took a brief note here is, I think no one mentioned, maybe it is obvious generally, but I'll just make it explicit that it is a cross-year group as well. So here we have second years and third years. We had a fifth year at some points. I plan to have quite a lot of second years and third years going forward, because it gives you a good mix of, like, second years can learn from the third years maybe who've done a lot of web programming before, like Stella had to get help from people who've done JavaScript before. And also you can do the VIP for multiple semesters, including multiple years. So you could start in the beginning of year 2, do it for 2 semesters then, and continue into year 3, 2 more semesters. You don't have to, of course, but that's an option. And if you do that, that means you are, like, you go through the steep learning curve and then you reap the benefits of it for longer, right? So that's maybe a nice feature of this as well. Okay. So I guess this is now the general discussion part. If you want to raise any interesting things you've heard from others, you can. or as you know, I can talk endlessly as well.
Pedro mentioned the 3099, the 30-year software engineering project, and I was just wondering, like, up to discussion, how is this different? How does this relate to one with a lot more people?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm the only one who can really talk about this, but the yeah, I think there are quite a lot of differences just in terms of obviously the 3099 groups and the super groups are generally like 25 people, and you're working on like kind of something that's you know, you have a theme and you can kind of build what you want around the theme, but you're still kind of constrained by that. It still feels a bit limiting just having to like work on that one thing. And that module is a lot more about learning kind of like software engineering, like in theory, I suppose. Like you kind of learn about like how Agile works, how Scrum works, and like why people use it. But you know, and even if you do use it in your team, it's kind of hard to see the benefit of it when you're not really working in like something that's producing open source software. I think it's really hard to kind of gauge it when it's like, you know, you're going to be done by the end of the year. I think the fact that the VIP does last longer than the project kind of shows why it's so important. Like, you know, you could write no documentation for your 3099 project and you'd probably be fine because everyone kind of knows it. But if someone was to try and take that on the next year, they'd be absolutely clueless. Like, there's a lot more that goes into like software than just like 1 year long project. I think the fact that it is so continuous kind of like differs a lot from 3099, but it is similar in a lot of senses. I think if you're in second year, it prepares you for 3099 quite well, because working with other people, working with like version control and Git are really important, and that's kind of a big learning curve for 3099. Is a lot of people just like fail to learn how to do like Git or like communicate with people properly, and it causes all sorts of like problems and issues. So I think it's a really good like prep for that in second year at least.
Yeah, I also think you definitely have a lot more responsibility being on the VIP.
Yeah.
Like, we can choose to leave this out of the recording if we want to, but I think with the 3099 project, there's definitely a lot more opportunity to kind of slack a bit, because your final project is kind of a lot more of a culmination of a lot of other people's work.
Yeah.
But in this project, basically every one of us is focusing on almost a completely different side of the Conjure ecosystem. I mean, even the people who are working on Conjure Oxide, each of us is specializing in something.
Yeah, I think that's a big point, is that you're marked as a group in 3099. You're still marked as an individual in this VAB because everyone's doing the same like thing. You can be marked on the product as a whole. So yeah, you're still very much like, you have to give a presentation about all the things you've done. You write a report on exactly what you've done, how it helps and stuff like that. Whereas in 3099, you write a group report where you've talked about what everyone's done, what everyone's contributions are, and you're kind of marked mostly on that. You know, unless barring some extent like circumstances where someone's done nothing, then you know obviously they will be marked differently, but generally you kind of are given the same mark as everyone else in your group if you've all kind of put in the same amount of effort, which means that, you know, there are people who definitely just put in the minimum amount of effort to get to that kind of step of marking, and it's kind of like a bit of a problem, but it's kind of all on you for this. You're kind of marked as an individual, so yeah, it's a group project, but you have to take a lot more responsibility for what you're making as like kind of a software engineer.
And then I'll also clarify here, just because the VIP is a little bit more individual in nature doesn't mean that other people are ignorant to the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
So because of the nature of how, you know, vertical it is, I'm able to go ahead and ask third years, you know, how do you debug this? And they'll know perfectly well because they have more experience than I do. So that doesn't go to say that I won't have other people able to help me. On the contrary.
Yeah. I think like one extra thing that I'll add in here is that in the VIP modules you can get help from like Oz and like other lecturers like Chris and stuff like that who are like working on the project, and that is an insanely useful thing that you don't really get in any other module. You know, you can ask questions about like the coursework or something, but generally lecturers can't give anything away. But when you put a pull request up on like something like that you've done, you can literally get like, oh, this is the line that should be changed to this. You know, you can have like debug sessions with lecturers and things, which is like a really, really big advantage, because you kind of you're not limited to your own knowledge and your own like time to research something. You can just ask people who have years and years of knowledge on the particular thing that you want to know, and you can kind of get results really quickly. So that's a big boost as well. You do a lot in a year just because of those like things.
Mm-hmm. I have one more very small thing, but I guess like in summary, I feel like with a lot of other courses, it can almost feel like it's you against the lecturers or the markers, where you're trying to pass some threshold. And but in the VIP, it's more like you're working with the lecturers, you're working with the professors, and the marking is just a side effect of this being a university course as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's much more collaborative.
I think Georgie is being very polite. He had his hand up.
I'm done.
I mean, I haven't really talked about like the upsides and downsides in my initial talk. So I was, in terms of like the upsides of this project, I think like a big one that people have kind of mentioned already, but because it's this big holistic software project, which is like, it's an actual tool that people are going to use, and it's actually going to be developed for like many years, probably like even after you like graduate or something. Because of that, it kind of forces you to actually properly examine like not just the code that you're writing, but also like the tools that you're using and like the whole process of how you're doing it, and even like the kind of like secondary things like documentation. Like it forces you to really think about like, how do I document the decisions that I make, so that like future people would understand what's going on. And I think that's really important. And yeah, like the fact that it's all different like years and like even lectures integrated together has been like a great learning experience for me as a second year, because like I did no Rust coming into it. I've done like a little bit of Rust links, but that's it. And now I feel like I'm kind of confident with Rust enough that I would probably even like try and do my own open source project over the summer in Rust, and that's really cool. But yeah, in terms of downsides, I would say a big one is that like you don't have a big design up front. So sometimes you just have to figure things out as you go. And like the design could change, you could have to like rewrite things. We have rewritten the Uniquate macros 3 times at this point, make us like finishing up the final version, hopefully. But I think that's kind of part of normal software development, really. So yeah.
Yeah, we don't really have a hands up feature in this thing we are using. So if you want to speak, please just do. I don't know if you have anything to add, Nadine, Stella, to upsides and downsides.
Yeah, I think Kieran mentioned learning how to use GitHub, and I thought that was very helpful for me because I hadn't really used it that much before. And so being able to use kind of an industry tool and make the mistakes now, when I can go to Oz and go, hey, what have I done? I've ruined it all. He can fix it for me and teach me what I should be doing before I get into industry and it's, you know, a project I can possibly mess up. So yeah, then I know skills now.
Yeah, I think that I do see this as a simulation of like a small company, and so we are involved, as you say. I had that tension early on, like how much should I do? Because there are sometimes cases where I'm like, oh, I know how to do this, but if I don't do it, this student can learn how to do it. They try, so I should hold off. So I'm trying to find the balance there as well. But I want the project to be done too, because this is actually something I care about, right? So it isn't a hypothetical, let's design something for the sake of having a thing to work on. But this is like the long term in this. I don't know if people believe us when we say that, but Conjur itself, I started as part of my PhD in 2009, and it is still maintained. Salver Rose started with a previous name in maybe 2005, before I was even here, and it is still maintained. A lot of these solvers, Minion even predates that, one of the solvers that we are using. So they have been open source, maintained by other people as well, not just us. Like people use it and care about it in the community, and they are maintained for 2 decades now, right? So the goal here is very ambitious. If we manage to do a re-engineering of it together with all the other ecosystem elements that we are talking about, we do want to switch over. So it's going to be like a Python 2 to Python 3 switch over at some point. So in a couple of years' time, I expect Conjure Oxide to be a reasonable at a reasonable level where we can start thinking about should we maintain the old one or should we switch completely. And if we do manage to switch, we will then maintain it. Like that is what we use for our research. It's a software toolkit that we use for further research. Yeah, and the only reason we are able to do this now is because we've done it before once, and we have made all the mistakes, and we think we now have a good design. So it isn't starting from scratch. We are cheating a lot. We are copying over from the old system the ideas, the kind of approaches as well, quite a lot. Yeah, so we do care about it. There's a community of people who are looking forward to this actually existing. And all the support tools, like the visualization Stellamade, actually there are people who care about permutation patterns, mathematicians who have problems to solve in permutation patterns. They use our website, they input something, they use it as a teaching tool as well as a research tool. So give it to students, the students enter some problems, press solve, they get the output, and they try to understand why. So now the output has a better visualization, which helps them understand it better, right? So it means our tool is more useful. I guess it's good for the publicity, right? If we are more useful, more people will use us, and it's good. They might come back and contribute to the system. So it's all really very good. And similarly, the block programming interface Nadine is working on, we might, if it is feature complete in a period of time, we might just start with that when we are teaching, right? Or if you have a touch screen in front of you, it's really good. Like even though, like when it is block programming, it sounds like it's for kids sometimes, but not really. Like if you have an iPad you are programming with, you might just drag and drop more easily than typing. So there are advantages to it. I have a question which might bring out some downsides, which is, so I think there's a conflict between this, let's work as a small company, and this being assessed work for credit. So you have to be graded with your work. How did you find the assessment side of things? Just before I mark your final submissions.
Yeah, I think the general idea of being assessed on it and stuff it doesn't feel like a too overwhelming thing until the very end. It's you really focus on it, and that's people were saying you put up a last minute PR and things, and you're trying to get a lot done in those last weeks, not because you haven't managed your time well, but because, like I was saying before, it's not ever a finished product, so there's always more you can do. So there's always more you feel like you can squeeze out. If you just put an extra hour into it, an extra PR up, you can get more marks. And like before in the year, you might have been thinking, oh, like this will just make the product better. Whereas near the end, you're thinking, I want to do more to get my mark higher, kind of thing. I want to have achieved more, which I think is a bit of a downside. It's kind of hard to avoid that because it is what's happening. It is being assessed, but it does make it kind of more of a race at the end, and things can get a bit more like sloppy, I think, in terms of people like rushing things and not getting like a lot of feedback on them and stuff. Which is a downside, but again, I think that the upsides definitely kind of like outweigh that, and it's just kind of I think it's the same for every module. There's always a rush on the last few days to get your report done, to get like your last tests done. There's always kind of a similar thing. It just feels a lot more because again, there's never an end point. You can never be like, oh, I finished early. Like you could spend an extra day on it easily if you wanted to. So it's kind of knowing when to stop and when you've kind of got a good base that you can kind of talk about and feel like, okay, I've achieved enough for this mark, instead of just saying I need to achieve even more for an even better mark forever, infinitely. It just doesn't really work that way.
I guess compared to other VIPs, especially if some of the newcomers have had experience with other VIPs, I think the approach that we take to talking about our work is very different. I was myself one of the members of the Dolphin Acoustics VIP in my second semester of my first year, or second year, and it was kind of very protocol driven. Like you had to like make these weekly reports, you following a certain structure, which talked about this, and it was always really difficult to do that. It was always really difficult to get yourself to kind of talk about what you've done. But this VIP definitely takes a much more realistic approach. I think with the new structure that this semester takes to weekly reports, it's very much just a report, basically, just really quickly, a few bullet points, what you've done, some blockers, how you think you're sitting with the rest of your, how much you think you can get done by the end of the semester. And that's very easy. And then the final reports, like the midterm reports and the final reports, you have a lot more to talk about. So it's much easier to come up with something to talk about there.
Yeah.
Anyone else? About assessment?
Yeah, I guess in terms of marking, I haven't actually done 1399 myself, but I know a person who's done 1399. Multiple people, in fact, and like one big frustration with it is because it's marked as a group. Some people would submit PRs in the last minute and like break things, and you would have to like worry about this a lot and overwork yourself like trying to fix it because like at the end of the day it was your group that was getting marked, not you individually. And I think here we kind of avoid that by being marked individually, and also like as long as you do your fair share of work, like your grade is not going to be bad either way. You just need to like submit things over the. I don't mean like submit specific assessments, but like submit PRs and like participate in the project. And as long as you do that, your grade is going to be good, which is.
Yeah, I think an extra thing to add on to this is that it's not all about getting like work like that works in the end. My first semester, I was like working on making some like things to make a solver called Chuffed work. And basically throughout that semester, like by the end, like I didn't have a working solution, not fully anyway, because it was just extremely difficult and there was a lot to learn. And so like one of the things is that like I wasn't marked badly on that because again, you kind of go through that. You've still achieved like I've tried this path of execution, I've tried this, I've tried like fixing this part, but that didn't work because of these reasons. You kind of still have a lot to talk about and explain, and it's good in the future because when someone comes back to do all those things for Chuffed, they'll know, okay, all these ways don't work. And that's still like a lot of work done, even if you've not, you know, got it working in the end. I think that it's a lot more about the effort you put in rather than the finished result. Like as long as you are gaining knowledge and like helping people out in the future, even if your project doesn't get working the way you envisioned it, you know, that doesn't mean you'll get like a 5 because that's just like it's not working. It's not quite the same as like it has to pass these tests like on StacksCheck to work. It's a lot more about like the work you just put in, which is quite nice. It's a good feeling.
And I was going to say that's the advantage of the reports as they're currently structured. The fact that you have one that's earlier on and one later on means that you can be measuring that progress. And I think one of the things that everyone had to do throughout is keep track of what you have done throughout the entire semester, whether it's taking notes or using that first report to really effectively track your progress so that you can demonstrate what you have tried to do regardless of what the final result is. So it's a bit more continuous than, I suppose, other assessments where your report is very final and discrete in terms of design choices. There's kind of not much space for what went wrong and why it went wrong and why that's just it. That's less part of your report as it is in the VIP, where that is essentially like everything that I tried, kind of Edison style, the 1001 ways that a light bulb can't be made. But I think it's a more interesting way of exploring your own progress from a more personal, professional level too. And the 515 reports, things that we have to write every week, also have an aspect of how do you feel about the work you're doing? How do you feel about the progress you're making? Which is a good way to also process the stress that comes with it and all of that.
Yeah.
Kind of extending on what's done. Yeah, go ahead.
Go on, Pedro.
No, just very briefly. The mid-semester report I think is really particularly useful because it serves for you like a way to reflect on what you did the first 5 weeks, and then if needed, reshift your focus on the project. and that gives you the opportunity to kind of like reflect really critically on what you've achieved the first 5 weeks and be like, I didn't learn enough about X, Y, Z. Let me refocus and start working on something else. And that, for me at least, was very useful. So
I think we didn't say explicitly the assessment pattern. I'll just very quickly insert that in. So every week you fill in this report called, it's a 15-5 or 5-15 report. It's supposed to be, it takes you less than 15 minutes to write and less than 5 minutes to read. So it's very quick. And you answer questions like, what have you done this week? What are you planning to do next week? There's a longer term one. What are you planning to do for the rest of the semester? And how are you feeling about your progress? Any blockers? What could you have done better? And that's essentially sent to me. I read those before the weekly meeting, and then it gives me a good general understanding of where you are. And it is really, I think, good to know for yourselves where you were at that week. Like you can go back and see what you said each week. There's a mid-semester report, which is 30% of assessed work. That is the primary purpose of that for me is planning the rest of the semester. So you do a bit of exploration until that point, and then at that point you say, this is what I want to commit to for the rest of the semester. Of course, you can change it within reasonable bounds. We could talk about things, but that gives you at least a plan A, like there could be a plan B. And the rest of it is the end of semester, which is 70%. And at the end of the semester, we have this event where everyone gives a talk. That is part of your final assessment as well, the 70%. That's the assessment pattern. So there are 2 places where you submit assessed work. I want to minimize how much work you have to do for those reports. I want it to be a collection of things you've produced already, like because we are producing a lot of stuff as we go. So I want it to be, ideally, you come to the end and you say, here's a bit of narrative for my semester, a couple of pages maybe, and then insert previously produced content for the rest of it. So it's capturing everything you've done rather than writing 10 pages from scratch. If you are writing 10 pages from scratch at the end, that means the process didn't work very well, like the weekly stuff. Yeah, so that's the assessment pattern. I think this is the end of how much time I wanted from you, but I don't want to keep you on for longer. But if you want to add anything, I'm very happy to do that as well. So maybe one last chance to sneak in more opinions.
I just want to bound on what everyone was saying about the assessments, and that is, it doesn't feel like it's going to be mocked until, like Kieran said, right in like the last week, and you suddenly realise that there's a deadline approaching. And then you kind of get a little bit of imposter syndrome of, oh my god, I haven't done anything. When in fact you have, because you've been working on it for 6 weeks, for 11 weeks, however long that deadline is. And sometimes it can feel like you don't have much to say until you sit down and write it all out. And then you do like, okay, actually I have managed to meet 10 pages, or, got a 10-minute presentation out of this, and it's kind of, it always amazes me from when I first started to when I finished how I actually managed to fill up the time and the space.
Absolutely. So I think that is one of my jobs, I think, is to make sure you do the right amount of work, like not too little so it isn't, you're not sort of getting a poor mark, or not too much so you're not killing yourself. Right? But I think a lot of you, as you say, if you engage with the process, you come to the weekly meetings, you write your weekly report, you, like with the feedback you get when needed, you have done impressive work. Like I'll tell you generally, not just the people here, everyone who's done the VIP. I think we had in total 10 people who engaged in the VIP both semesters this year. I think everyone has been very impressive, especially second years and third years who are still learning a lot of the basics. I think it's been impressive progress, and not just for the project or like what I got out of you, but also I can see you have improved as in your skills. And I think that's very good to see for me. Yeah, I'm really enjoying this. I'm hoping we will get some more interested students who want to do the VIP. The main thing I want is like the reason that we are recording this video is I wanted to make sure everyone knows what they're getting into, that you have to be quite individually organized, that you have to take a lot of responsibility for your work, and you can hopefully shine in this environment if you enjoy this kind of work. But also, want to make sure people who wouldn't enjoy it also know what's going on in the VIP, and then they know this is one thing they should avoid maybe. But yeah, I think we can wrap up. It does feel like I'm the host of some sort of podcast, the way we are doing this, especially with this in the way. Yeah, so thank you very much for doing this. And yeah, looking forward to working more with you, whether in the VIP or in some other capacity in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.